Does Tylenol cause autism? While the president and the head of the HHS are both telling us that we should be sounding the alarm,
Tylenol during pregnancy can be associated with a very increased risk of autism.
Meanwhile, the other side of the media repeatedly states that there's no evidence.
There is no evidence to link the use of paracetamol by pregnant women to autism in their children. None.
What's really going on with this whole Tylenol and autism thing? We're going to be looking at the science of both prenatal exposure to Tylenol, so basically what happens to the child when the mother takes it, and what happens to young children when they take it later in their lives. Now, historically, aspirin was the anti-inflammatory of choice, especially for young children. However, throughout the 70s and then all culminating in a CDC announcement in 1980, there was a lot of hysteria about something called Ray's syndrome, which apparently was being caused by aspirin in children. They sounded the alarms and they told everyone to switch over to Tylenol in the hospitals. And it was right around this time that the CDC made this announcement where autism rates really began to take off. Now, what's interesting is that also around this time, more immunizations or vaccines were being used in children. And of course, there's a ton of hysteria around vaccinations potentially causing autism in children as well. Now, we're not going to get into that in this video, but it is interesting to note that there was a heavy association of administering the MMR vaccine alongside Tylenol and subsequent neurodevelopmental disorders. For example, one study showed that after receiving this vaccine, that the children who took acetaminophen or Tylenol had drastically higher rates of developing autism, up to 8 times the risk. And this association was not seen for ibuprofen. So the chances that this was due to the mother having some type of inflammatory condition or them just misremembering what happened is probably pretty small. Now, again, this is just one early study, and at the end of the day, this is just an association. So we need to look into causative data. Now, of course, there are no clinical trials examining this issue, but there are plenty of animal studies examining the mechanisms behind Tylenol and the developing brain. Some researchers have hypothesized that Tylenol, along with the administration of antibiotics and the herbicide glyphosate, have all contributed synergistically to the rise in autism. And there's an interesting mechanistic link between the use of Roundup or glyphosate and that of Tylenol. And that's because both of these can deplete the body's stores of glutathione and of sulfate. Now, glutathione is our body's primary antioxidant, so it protects against oxidative damage and inflammation, and it's also very important for our detoxification. Sulfate is also very important for our detoxification. And Tylenol is well known to deplete glutathione. In fact, the reason why Tylenol is so toxic for the liver is because it rapidly depletes glutathione, your detoxification, your antioxidant support. It all gets drained very rapidly, and this condition is treated with a glutathione precursor and acetylcysteine. So the fact that Tylenol can deplete glutathione is not really controversial. Other research has shown that yes, Tylenol can lower the amount of sulfate. And sulfate is very important because sulfate attaches to certain hormones and it allows them to travel throughout the body. In particular, one hormone called DHEAS or DHEA sulfate is incredibly important for all different types of functions throughout the body, especially in the brain. And as it turns out, if you give animals Tylenol, their levels of these sulfated hormones, these sulfated steroids, declines. Especially for the developing brain, DHEAS is very important to deliver into the placenta so that the brain can start to configure new synapses, the brain cells can grow and mature properly. And studies in humans show that DHEAS is very important for functions like connectivity between brain regions and lowering inflammation in the brain. Now, all of these processes can be disrupted in autism, which to me should make you raise the red flag. And the main problem with Tylenol in this respect is its metabolism. So essentially, when you take Tylenol, your body doesn't excrete it as Tylenol. It has to chemically modify it in order to get it out of the body through the urine. So Tylenol can undergo the sulfation or the glucuronidation methods of detoxifying. Basically, these compounds compounds get added to the Tylenol molecule, and then your body can urinate it out. And this is pretty standard for most toxins, and it goes over just fine. However, Tylenol is pretty unique in that there's another metabolic pathway for it to go through that generates a highly reactive and much more toxic compounds called NAPQI. And this compound absolutely destroys your cells. It causes mitochondrial dysfunction. It causes your cells to shut down their energy production entirely. It basically rips apart their structure because it's so reactive. And this is why your body needs so much glutathione in order to detoxify Tylenol, and why your glutathione stores become depleted with Tylenol. Because not only is your glutathione being depleted from all this damage that's going on, but it also needs glutathione in order to detoxify this toxic compound. And once again, we see mitochondrial dysfunction, we see oxidative stress, and we see low levels of glutathione, all in autism. Now, a couple of years ago, there was a consensus statement put out in the prestigious journal called Nature, and it was signed off by 91 different scientists, and they all basically came together and said, we need to pump the brakes on Tylenol because a lot of this information, a lot of the science around it is quite concerning. So they detailed all of the different mechanisms that we just talked about, and they also looked at association studies. And they found that 26 out of the 29 studies that they looked at found associations between Tylenol use and developing autism. And out of 19 studies that looked at dose dependency, 16 of them found a dose-dependent response. In other words, the more Tylenol the mother or the child took, the more likely they were to get autism. And one of the most compelling studies was done in 2019 out of the Journal of the American Medical Association, and they found a strong increased risk of developing autism when measuring the levels of Tylenol and its metabolites in the cord fluid. Specifically, at the highest level of these metabolites in the umbilical cord fluid, children were at risk of well over a 3-fold increase of developing both ADHD and autism. And once again, they tried to make sure that they controlled for confounding factors, such as if the mother had some sort of illness that necessitated the use of Tylenol. However, a much larger study came out in 2024, same journal, and they found no association between Tylenol use and developing autism. And what's cool about this study is that they did sibling controls, and essentially this allowed them to rule out genetic confounding variables. But when we look at controlled animal studies of being administered Tylenol either in the womb or as a young pup, we see consistently that these animals have behavioral and cognitive abnormalities, often that mirror autism in humans. This was another recent study done analyzing the differential gene expression of mice that were exposed to Tylenol, and they show that there were upregulations in genes involved in inflammation, cell death, and there were also decreases in energy metabolism. Other studies have shown that Tylenol can impact the growth and proliferation of brain cells by lowering the master protein known as BDNF, or brain-derived neurotrophic factor. And this was only in certain brain regions that they found a drop in BDNF. In other brain regions, they found no change. But anything that causes a drop in your BDNF is sufficient to impair your brain's development, because BDNF, like I said before, is the master regulator of brain cell growth, maturation, and development. And once again, in autism, we see lower levels of BDNF. And there are some other mechanistic links between Tylenol and autism. What I've covered here are just the most prominent, but at least to my eye, it does look like we should be pretty cautious about administering Tylenol during pregnancy, and especially for young children. The association between aspirin and Ray's syndrome has been disputed since then, and it seems to be a much safer overall option. Obviously, I'm not your doctor, don't just listen to me. And while I do think Tylenol can definitely contribute to the processes of autism and perhaps even raise the risk, the fact that we do have studies showing no association in addition to studies showing association tells me that if there is an effect, which I believe there probably is, it's not the largest effect in the world. So while the mainstream media continues to tell us that there's no evidence of this whatsoever, we kind of know that that's not true. There's plenty of science on this and it's been researched for decades, but I'm also not sure if it warranted a national address from the president and to dominate the news headlines for multiple days. But hey, if this is just the beginning and we're gonna start to get more people aware of all the different toxins in the environments that can affect their children and themselves, then I'm all for it. So whether or not you do think that Tylenol causes autism or not, I think the awareness around the topic is very important. And in my opinion, I mean, I wouldn't have my wife take it if she was about to give birth. I'll just say that. If I had a wife, that is. Now, if you do want to get some personalized help from us, we do offer that through Prism. We have multiple different practitioners on board. We've worked with over 500 different clients, helping people every single day optimize their hormones, their metabolism, their nutrition, lifestyle, anything you need help with. Just book a free call with us here and we'll get you set up. Finally, if you want to get any lab testing done in the United States without a doctor, you can do so through Revelation Diagnostics. All you got to do is go to the website, pick out your labs, add them to cart, and then find a lab nearest to you. And you can use code ANALYZE for 10% off at checkout. But with all that being said, that's going to do it for this video, and I will see you guys in the next one.